Lauriston Castle. Located only 3 miles from the heart of Edinburgh, yet enjoying remarkable tranquillity, Lauriston Castle is situated beside the Firth of Forth at Davidson's Mains, near Cramond. It commands a notable view across the river to Fife and beyond, as far as the mountains of Perthshire. In the past, there were many such estates dotted up the coast. Some of these houses have been lost completely, while others have been converted into hotels, offices, or flats. Few of these bear any trace of their history in their decoration. Lauriston survives unspoilt as a fully furnished house, complete with rich collections. This is due to the generosity and foresight of the house's last owners, Mr. William and Mrs. Margaret Reid. In their later years, they decided to leave the castle, contents, and grounds to the nation for the use of the public in all time coming and the intelligent education of the public taste. Visitors to the castle today see it as it would have been when the Reeds lived there. Lauriston Castle's last residents were Mr. William and Mrs. Margaret Reid, and Mrs. Reid's brother, Mr. William Barton. The three had agreed that whichever one of the three of them who outlived the others would leave the house to the nation. Mr. Barton passed away in 1911, while Mr. Reid passed in 1919 and Mrs. Reid in 1926. The Reids and Mr. Barton were born in Edinburgh, the children of 2 families which were involved in locally owned businesses. Mr. Reid's father, also William, had taken over the company of Morrison & Co., furniture makers. Which Mr. Reid would go on to inherit and grow. Morrison & Co. became one of Scotland's premier furniture makers and was the first in Scotland to design and build the interiors of luxury trains, for which it became very well known. Mrs. Reid's father ran a company of plumbers named Barton and Sons. This company became one of the biggest in Edinburgh, undertaking work in many large country houses. They also fitted theatres, hospitals, and public buildings with plumbing and electricity. Mr. Barton, Mrs. Reid's brother, became a managing director of the company, and it continued to grow. It is thought likely that Mr. Reid and Mr. Barton met through their work restoring and updating country houses. And that this is how Mr. and Mrs. Reid met, eventually getting married on the 8th of July 1896. After their marriage, Mr. and Mrs. Reid took up residence at 78 George Street, in a large suite of rooms situated above the showroom of Morrison and Company. The house had been completely modernised, as would Lauriston Castle be, fitted with electricity and elegantly furnished. The Reids took their furniture with them when they moved to Lauriston, including their bathtub and some 22 fireplaces. Mr. Reid had always wanted to possess someday an interesting old house with a piece of ground attached to it, and in 1902 purchased Lauriston Castle to help him realise his dream. In 1903, he sold Morrison & Co. and moved to Lauriston with Mrs. Reid and her brother, Mr. Barton. The Reids had previously lived at 78 George Street, above Morrison & Co.'s showroom, and therefore already had a great deal of furniture which they brought with them to Lauriston. Once they had moved in, they began new collections, particularly of Italian furniture, especially for the house. The castle now provides one of the best snapshots of Edwardian life in Scotland. Before the castle was purchased by the Reids, it had a long succession of owners dating back to the 14th century, when the estate was granted to a John Tennant. Between that date and 1926, some 30 different families have owned Lauriston, and the size of the estate has fluctuated significantly, mostly downwards, over that same period. The castle has also seen some significant architectural changes over the centuries. The oldest part of the house, the tower, was constructed in 1593 for Archibald Napier, Laird of Merchiston, and father of John Napier, famous for the invention of logarithms and namesake of the Scottish University. The tower house was T-shaped and very typical of late 16th century country house architecture. The major part of Lauriston Castle, as enjoyed by visitors today, was built by Thomas Allen, newspaper proprietor and a mineralogist who owned the castle between 1823 and 1833. He commissioned prominent architect William Byrne to renovate and extend the castle. After some debate involving tearing the whole thing down and starting again, Byrne incorporated his design around the original building and mirrored one or two of the original design features, such as the turret window rooms at the corner of the building. using tall chimney stacks to add height and create a more cohesive building. The next owner to have a significant impact was Andrew, Lord Rutherford, an advocate and MP for Leith. He commissioned another famous name from Scottish architecture, William Playfair. The porch at the main entrance holds the Rutherford crest, a mermaid with a mirror in hand, and the motto, "By sea and land." He also commissioned the building of the stone boundary wall and had porches added to the south and west doors. He also commissioned major work in the grounds, turning them into gardens worthy of a fine country home. The final addition to the rear of the house was made by Thomas McKnight Crawford, who bought the estate in 1871. It was he who commissioned the idea of a second-storey extension above the kitchens and servants' quarters, the library, which will be discussed in more depth later. McKnight Crawford sold the property to the last owners, the Reeds, who made small modifications to the fabric of the building itself. But their main contribution is the splendid Edwardian interior, housing several important collections. The house, as it appears today, is the creation of Lauriston's last owners, Mr. William and Mrs. Margaret Reed, who owned the house in the early 20th century and left it to the nation upon Mrs. Reed's death in 1926. The entrance hall was originally a much more austere room than we see currently. In the 1820s, it had a vaulted ceiling, and the walls were probably painted to look like stone. It was designed as a transitional space, leading visitors from the outside to the interior. The Reeds altered this. They put a new ceiling in, papered the walls with red stained paper, and installed electricity. They wanted a less austere style, and to make the room more part of the interior, adding wall hangings to insulate the room and to give a warmer, more homely feel. Two doors flank the main staircase. The servants' quarters are to the right, guest corridors to the left. Directly upstairs from the entrance hall sits the reception hall. All of the castle's principal rooms lead from this room. The chandelier was installed by the Reeds in 1903, after enlarging the skylight installed by William Byrne. At the centre of the room sits an ornate table, decorated with delicately cut inlaid marble. This table is thought to date from the 16th century and is Italian in origin. During the Reeds' time at Lauriston, they kept a bowl of water under this table for their various pets to drink from. The reception hall houses a large proportion of the Reeds' collection of Blue John, a rare mineral found only in Derbyshire, and immensely valuable as it is brittle and difficult to work with. The Reeds owned some 80 pieces, fashioned into vases, bowls, and lamp bases, making it one of Scotland's largest and most significant collections of Blue John. This room is also home to a significant collection of Crossley wool mosaics, which were unfashionable at the time Mr. Reed was collecting them. They were mass-produced, made to look like tapestries, but created by gluing tiny pieces of wool to a cotton backing. They were debuted at the 1851 Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace. There has been much speculation as to the presence of the mosaics at Lauriston, as they were made very cheaply and were not fashionable at the time. But it is entirely possible that Mr. Reed bought them because he enjoyed them, rather than for any grander reason. Many of these pieces have Scottish themes, and they do help tie the room together, as they complement the red colour scheme continued from the entrance hall and throughout much of the main house. The fireplace in this room was brought from the Reeds' home on George Street and is the one they were married in front of, providing a happy reminder of that joyful day. Mr. Reed's study, known since 1827 as the Oak Room, is situated in the oldest part of the castle, the Tower House that was constructed for Alexander Napier in the 16th century. It originally would have been the Napiers' principal meeting room, and was the largest room in the house until William Burns' great redesign in 1827. Although retired, Mr. Reed still took on commissions for architectural work and designs for luxury train carriages. And he carried out his work in this room. He also had a telephone installed, one of the first in the area. Their number was Davidson's Mains 10. In the embrasure of the small window towards the back of the room, there is hidden a narrow flight of steps leading to a secret chamber contained within the thickness of the exterior wall. From this little room, it was possible to spy on events happening in the room. at least prior to the installation of the decorative ceiling in 1827. This room also features several portraits and photographs of Mr. and Mrs. Reed and Mr. Barton. The oak room would have been used as a less formal sitting room after smaller dinners, the fireplace making the room a cosy spot, perfect for after-dinner discussions of business. Mrs. Reed's bedroom was the principal bedroom of the house from 1827 onwards. It originally communicated directly with the dressing room, en suite style, but the connecting door was closed up in 1845 by Playfair during his renovations. Although occupied by both Mr. and Mrs. Reed, it was designated as Mrs. Reed's, following the conventions of the time. The large window in this room faces west. It was provided with secondary glazing, a rare luxury in the Reed's time. To protect against drafts from the prevailing westerly wind. Other modernisation efforts included central heating in the form of a large radiator fitted by Barton and Sons and mounted on a table to provide gravity-assisted drainage. Electric lighting, modern sanitation, and a piped water supply. A wash hand basin was installed in 1903. The corridor leading to the dressing room from Mrs. Reed's bedroom laps around the curving wall of the spiral staircase of the original tower house. The small window in the wall was originally external. The dressing room also had its fair share of modern fittings, including a large bath with a shower attached, hot running water, and a heated towel rail, a luxurious rarity at the time. The dressing room also features a Louis XV style toilet, rumoured to be modelled on the one owned by Queen Victoria. The more public rooms were also decorated to reflect the Reeds' exquisite taste in home furnishings. The sitting room was designed by William Byrne to combine the functions of a billiard room and a museum. Wall recesses contained cabinets built to house Thomas Allen's collection of mineral specimens, which numbered over 8,000. The collection was sold after Allen's death and is now at the Natural History Museum in London. In 1903, William Reed fitted the room as a billiard room, using a Morrison & Co. billiard table. The restrained neoclassicism of this style would have been considered appropriately masculine in the Edwardian era. some years later, and it can be imagined with more than a little persuasion from Mrs. Reed, the billiard table was moved downstairs and the room became solely a sitting room. A fine view across the grounds to the River Forth has never changed, creating a tranquil atmosphere across this room and the drawing room, which is connected to the sitting room by a pair of sliding doors. The drawing room adjoins the sitting room by means of two sliding doors, which could be closed to afford more privacy to either room. The principal reception room of the 1827 editions made by William Byrne for Thomas Allen, the drawing room, features a gorgeous coved ceiling. Following trends fashionable at the time, in 1903, William Reed decorated and furnished this room in the French style of Louis XV. Panels of red silk damask, carved over doors, and corner pilasters were fitted. The chandelier was added at the same time as its twin in the sitting room, after Mr. Reed had the billiard table moved downstairs and replaced the table lights with it. The piano was a wedding present to Mrs. Reed from her brother in 1896. It is made of Spanish mahogany and originally was not decorated. The case was decorated when they moved to Lauriston, so that the French style matched the style of the drawing room they were creating here. The initial M stands for Margaret, which was Mrs. Reed's first name. Central heating was installed in the form of two marble-topped radiators situated in the bay window, although a large fireplace also ensured that guests would be warm as they relaxed after dinner in the dining room. Traditionally regarded as a more masculine space than the more feminine drawing room, the dining room was decorated accordingly. Here, Mr. Reed chose a Dutch-influenced late 17th century style of decoration, incorporating 4 Flemish tapestries. The tapestries were cut to fit the frames on the walls, and the decorative borders were used to create pelmets over the windows. The ceiling, with its coved cornice, was created in 1903 and hangs beneath a combed ceiling similar to that in the library, installed by William Byrne in 1827. The carpet, made in Turkey, is one of several ordered for the house when the Reeds moved in 1903. Its original colour, a rich, deep red, was intentionally bleached in order to mute the colour and prevent it from overpowering the soft blues and greens of the tapestries. This attitude towards altering or even cutting up expensive pieces, like the carpet and the tapestries, is very different to our own, but is typically Victorian or Edwardian. The dining table, unusually for the time, is round. Up to 12 people could be comfortably seated for dinner. Although the Reeds preferred smaller, more intimate gatherings, usually of no more than 8 people. The Reeds loved to entertain, and it seems the house was rarely quiet, with guests enjoying a 5-course meal and some excellent conversation. No doubt stimulated by Mr. Reed's love of champagne. To this end, Mr. Reed had an octagonal cellaret dating from around 1775, lined with zinc in order that it could hold up to 8 bottles and a decanter of champagne. Originally, the corridor connecting the dining room to the kitchen and maid's hall by way of a steep stone spiral staircase was purely a service corridor, providing access to the house from downstairs. It was extended in 1871 to 1872 to unite the newly completed library with the main rooms of the house. A door set into a deep recess leads from this corridor down the back stairs to the servants' quarters. Mr. Reed had the windows in this corridor filled with panels of stained glass, principally of European origin. The glass dates to the 16th century. These provided interest to an otherwise plain corner, and also concealed the view of the servants' entrance across the courtyard. At the end of the library corridor, and in the newest part of the house, lies the library. Completed between 1871 and 1872 for Thomas McKnight Crawford, the library was constructed on top of the service rooms designed in 1827 by William Byrne, making it Lauriston Castle's most modern addition. The combed ceiling is likely similar to the one in the dining room that Mr. Reed had covered up. In 1903, William Reed introduced a Venetian red fabric to cover the tops of the bookshelves, effectively halving their height. He used this space to display part of his extensive collection of prints, which can be seen all through the house. The books we see at Lauriston today are a part of their extensive collection, the majority of the library being left to the National Library of Scotland on Mrs. Reed's death in 1926. The bay windows surrounding the cosy area that houses the writing desk give a fine view across the garden. A library table, sometimes known as an architect's table, stands in the centre of the room. It is possible that Mr. Reed would work on his commissions at this table, as tables of this kind are useful for creating large plans and drawings, although they are equally useful for holding large books. A sizable fireplace ensured that the room was always warm and comfortable. A perfect place to spend a peaceful afternoon reading. If Mr. Reed was enjoying a novel, he may have done so from his gentleman's library chair, which was designed to be sat astride and which supported the chest. It would have been unseemly for a woman to sit this way, so this was a men's only chair. The chair at Lauriston is a Morrison & Co. copy, made in the 1880s of an original 1720s design. The housekeeper's room and the maids' bedrooms have also remained unchanged since the death of Mrs. Reed in 1926, keeping all their original furnishings. Although considerably much less grand than the upstairs rooms, the bedrooms were comfortable enough. The Reeds had a staff of around 10 servants, from the housekeeper to the maids to their chauffeur and gardener. Only the female staff lived in, with male staff living in the nearby village of Davidson's Mains. That the Reeds were considered to be fair employers is attested to by the recollections of the daughter of Anne Nichol. Assistant cook at Lauriston Castle from 1914 to 1923. My mother's working life at Lauriston Castle commenced when she was 15 years of age. A feature of life at the castle was the very high quality of the food, enjoyed not only by the Reeds themselves, but also by their staff. The Reeds liked to entertain, and after my mother had been with them a year or two, Mrs. Reed sent her on various cooking courses at the Atholl School of Cookery in Edinburgh. After the Great War ended, dances were held regularly in the Cramond Church Hall. There, the staff from Lauriston would meet their friends who worked at Broomfield, Muir House, and other large houses in the area. Officially, the staff are not allowed outside the grounds in the evening. However, the housekeeper ensured they never missed any of the dances. The general opinion was that the Reeds were very fair employers. And this appears to have been reflected in the lack of staff turnover during these years. The fact that the house was fitted with central heating and electricity probably helped, as it meant less time spent maintaining candles and gas lamps, and no need to heat large quantities of water for bathing. Few of the Reeds' personal papers survive. It is thought that Mr. Reed had all personal diaries and correspondence burned to preserve the family's privacy. The house was left to the nation for its fine collection of furniture and antiquities, and was not intended to provide an intimate commentary on the daily lives of the Reeds. Lauriston Castle's rooms are highly atmospheric and quintessentially Edwardian. To walk through them is to experience a country house interior still displaying the opulence and leisure which typified the wealthy middle-class way of life in Scotland prior to the First World War. The castle is, in some respects, a compendium of the lives of the many interesting previous owners who left their mark upon it. From designing and building whole rooms, to lovingly decorating the interior with beautiful and valuable furnishings and artwork. Today's visitor therefore experiences an historic house, modest in scale, but possessing a remarkably rich and varied history. Today, Lauriston Castle is one of the most popular events venues in the north of the city and hosts a year-round programme of lectures, creative workshops, family events, environmental events, theatre, performance and school events. You can hear more about our programmes and news by visiting edinburghmuseums.org.uk or following our Lauriston Castle Facebook page.